Let's bang this shit out. Let's go. Moist.
Oh, you got there before me. I was just about to launch into a wonderful intro, and you come out with moist.
That's turned off half of our viewers now.
It certainly turned off your good lady. I know that for a fact. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks to that wonderful intro. It's completely thrown me.
Yes. I start early.
And finish early from what I hear. So this is Poddywood. I am one of your hosts, Steve Hester, trying desperately not to laugh. And with me, as always, is...
That would be me, Andrew Roger Carson. Welcome to Poddywood Episode 8, The Fate of the Furious.
Ooh.
I found an 8.
Found the number 8, yeah.
Yes.
We were toying with the idea of doing Star Wars, but we already did that for Episode 6, so... We have a fun-packed episode this week. Coming on a little bit later, we have Jay Oliva, who is, or has been, one of the heads of Warner Brothers Animation for the past decade, responsible for a slew of the DC animated movie output, and has also been working on movies such as, well, pretty much everything in the DC cinematic universe, and also some Marvel movies, but we'll be getting onto that in a bit. First... we have the Rocket Science review.
Yes, last week on What's in the Box, Steve was lucky enough to get something more resembling a comedy instead of all of this ultra-serious stuff that we've been putting him through every single week. And we got Rocket Science, which was a 2007 movie by Jeffrey Blitz.
Well, yes, like you say, the last few weeks it's been real-life kidnapping and murder, vaginal dentures, and then the horrors of rape and murder during a war, so it's not exactly been a fun few weeks for me. This week, though, we watched Rocket Science, which is a story about a young guy called Hal, who's in high school, and he has a speech impediment, and he gets invited to join the school debating team by a girl called Ginny, played by Anna Kendrick, who looks completely unrecognisable.
She looks so young in this movie.
She does.
This was prior to Twilight.
Yeah.
The first one. So that's how far back this is.
And it's a comedy-ish, but it's one of those kind of comedies which were very prevalent in the early 2000s, along with things like Napoleon Dynamite and Juno. They're kind of very, very quirky, gawky teenagers who are very, very insular. And then you've got other teenagers who, even though they're like about 14, they're polysyllabic vocabularies and seem to be ultra super intelligent and slightly a bit bitchy. And the whole movie just has lots of tone that you could easily see in maybe like a Wes Anderson movie, but without the skillful camera work that's going on there. In terms of it being a comedy, I wasn't laughing very much. There's a couple of smirky moments, but overall I was just thinking, well, this is very, very kooky. And yeah, it was a film. I don't think it's certified fresh, but you know, it was certainly a damn sight better than the last couple of weeks. Easier to watch for a start off, I'll give you that.
It was a nice way to kind of ease you back into, you know, some other films until you get whatever you get today.
I know. God alone knows what it's going to be like later when we pull it out of the box. But it's probably going to be something completely horrific. It's probably going to be The Killing Fields or something like that.
It could be. You never know. It could be. So, on a final note of Rocket Science, is this recommended? What kind of people will like this movie?
Well, like you say, if you watched any of those movies like Napoleon Dynamite, you're probably going to love this. Because it's the same kind of tone. Everything's all on the same kind of level. You know, you've got music which is basically made up of a kazoo and an accordion. The ending's rather anticlimactic in my book. Everything kind of builds and builds and builds, and then just gets completely just swept away. Which I suppose is realistic, but not really what you want in a movie, and it doesn't really have a very satisfying resolution. And if you're after a movie which deals with people that have speech impediments, then just go watch The King's Speech. It was made later, but it's a much better film. Yeah.
I thought Rocket Science was made after the King's Speech.
No, King's Speech was, I think it was like about 2011, 2012.
That late?
Yeah.
I could have swore that was around 2005, 2006-ish.
No, it was later than that.
Oh my God.
And the reason that I know it was later than that is that I was quite thin at the time. I know, that's made you spit your coffee out, hasn't it?
It's not even coffee, it's water. That's how realistic that was. Jesus. Well, I am actually going to go on the defense for Rocket Science because I actually enjoyed it.
Well, I'm not saying that people shouldn't enjoy it, and people probably will enjoy it, and enough people have enjoyed it for it to get a certified fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But for me, it was just there, really. It was the cinematic equivalent of wallpaper. Didn't really get much out of it.
But one thing I do want to say is, look, it's incredibly easy to be snobby about films, and people do get incredibly snobbish about films, and we are not that kind of podcast, okay? We like them, we don't like them, but we would never actively say, don't go and see this film. Anyway, so that is the full-on review of what's in the box. And as usual, we take this opportunity to segue into our anniversaries segment because there are a couple of very interesting films, not saying they're good films or bad films, that's kind of up to you guys, that are celebrating their anniversaries this week. So cue that shit, Neil.
We watch them again all of the time, or we get them on Prime for free. But we only know how old they are when we learn their anniversary.
Let's start on the anniversaries, the films that are celebrating their releases way back when. And let's see if you've seen them, or if you've not seen them, and how we feel about them. Steve, Did you know that 40 years ago this week, Raiders of the Lost Ark was released?
My God.
And
Wow.
changed childhoods forever.
Wow, 40 years.
40 years, and Indy is currently here, not even... What? They're only up in Yorkshire, which is not far from where we are.
No.
Filming Indiana Jones 5 right now.
I am not excited about Indiana Jones 5 at all. Not in the slightest.
Why?
He's too old. It's as simple as that. And this is not a slight against Harrison Ford, because, you know, you can't fight the ravages of time, but you want to have a young, swashbuckling adventurer, and you can't do that if you're pushing 80.
That's true, but I am intrigued by the plot of this film because Indiana Jones is basically uncovering the point where Harrison Ford wishes his agent forgot his number.
He does look constantly pissed off about that fact, doesn't he? How'd you get hold of my number? God, I thought I was unlisted. George Lucas wants you to be in another movie. Oh, fine, whatever.
Maybe he has a talking dog in this one. And that segues into him then becoming Han Solo. And it find out it's a connected universe between Indiana Jones and Star Wars.
Oh, probably.
Because they'll say, we said it all along, didn't you see those C-3PO and R2-D2 things in the temples? Okay, well, yes. Happy birthday, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yes.
Absolutely amazing film, and there's got to be probably a lot of our younger listeners, if we actually have any listeners, who may not have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, and maybe their first introduction was that time where Indiana Jones escaped a nuclear blast in a fridge. Trust me, Raiders of the Lost Ark is genius, even though I will say I like Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls as well. So...
Last Crusade for me. That's the best one by far.
Ooh, controversial. Okay, let's go for 35 years ago. Did you know, Steve,
I don't know, Andy.
that 35 years ago, Back to School was released?
That's Rodney Dangerfield?
Rodney Dangerfield and
Yes.
a very young Robert Downey Jr. starting his career off.
Oh, he played his son, didn't he?
I think he played his son's friend. I'm pretty sure it was Keith Gordon who played his son in it, from my recollection.
Now that you mention it, yeah, I've got a picture in my head of Robert Downey Jr. in kind of like, I want to say the same kind of coat that Arnie wore in the first Terminator. But with like little shitty earrings and like some round sunglasses on.
Well, this was the era where Robert Downey Jr. played the best friend to everybody in a movie. So he was like one of the best friend, although bullies in Weird Science. Mm-hmm. He was the best friend to James Spader in Tough Turf, What a classic movie that is. And obviously he's Keith Gordon's best friend in Back to School. So all within this kind of decade and this time frame, he just was the kooky friend.
I'm really glad that he was able to get things back on track and join the MCU. One, because it's always nice to hear about someone that's fallen and then manages to get some redemption. And two, I cannot honestly imagine the MCU now without him playing Tony Stark.
So yeah, Back to School, starring Rodney Dangerfield, 35 years old today. One that is 25 years old this week is a very obscure film, but I decided to include this purely because it was the only film of its time to feature Glenn Ruth in an acting role and not in WWE. So it was a film called The Passion of Darkly Noon that starred Brendan Fraser, Ashley Judd, and Viggo Mortensen, and Glenn Ruth had a small, tiny role in that.
That name rings a bell. I know for a fact I haven't seen it, but
it is a kind of title that does stand out.
Yeah. It's like The Legend of Bag of Ants. It just kind of stays in your head, even though you've not seen the film.
I have seen that film. That's the Will Smith and Matt Damon golfing movie.
Matt Damon.
Not a Kathy Bates insight.
No.
Okay. I got my Kathy Bates plug-in. 15 years ago, did you know, Steve?
I don't know, Andrew?
That it was the release of the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift.
This is the one which is completely out of the timeline with the rest of the ones, is that right?
Yeah, this is where it started going all over, and they've kind of reincorporated it back in now with the new Fast and the Furious, and Lucas Black, who is the main character in it, has now come into it again, so I understand. So it was kind of seen as this black sheep of the Fast and Furious family. And at the time, it was kind of, wow, this is so far removed, and it's only got a tiny cameo from Vin Diesel at the end to kind of tie this all in. But now it's kind of like, oh, no, it's canon. It's all feeds into it. Even though at the time we're not stupid, we know it didn't. And you just couldn't rope the original stars back at the time.
Up until, I think up until then, you had this idea that if you had a first film that did well, then you did a sequel that did well, and then you had diminishing sequels after that. After that, everything went downhill. Budgets went downhill, cast usually struggled to return or didn't want to return, whatever. So you could see that kind of in Tokyo Drift. But then everything came back with, what was it? Was it The Fast and the Furious?
It came back with, I think it was just called Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
You get confused with the titles of them over a while because it's like they don't even try after a while. Then it goes Fast 5, Furious 6... Fasty, Fury 7, and stuff like that. And I tell you what,
and 9.
Yes, every single way they can use it. It's like they're looking for the everything on a website and they're just typing up every single kind of keyword they can. Right? I can tell you something, Fast and Furious, if Fast and Furious, the fourth one, hadn't gone the way it did, this franchise would have been direct to DVD, I'm telling you.
Without question.
After Tokyo Drift. Yeah. That was the writing on the wall, like, this thing's tanking. We need to bring the original crew back and change the entire focus of these movies to the point now where they're just loud, huge, bad. They don't even have to make sense. It's not Ronin. That's what I always say.
No, but I think it's also done quite well for other franchises as well. Like the Mission Impossible franchise, I think they're up to about number 7 or something by themselves. 6 or 7, I can't remember exactly.
Isn't it 7.5 this week?
Something like that, anyway.
This thing's just never getting finished. And obviously there's one extra movie that is celebrating its anniversary, and we're doing a special on it next week. Green Lantern is 10 years old this week, and this kind of deserved its own episode, despite what Bill Daly says. It does deserve its own episode, because people want to know more about this movie. People, as I say, are genuinely kind of torn on it, but we're still fascinated by it. Right? We are fascinated by Green Lantern because people will bring it up constantly. Ryan Reynolds does it all of the time, even in his superhero movies now.
Yeah, but usually it's to mock it, though.
Yeah, but in terms of mocking it, don't we need to know the story behind it? And kind of judge from there what was going on with it. And that is what we're doing next week on our special. We have brought in former senior vice president of Warner Brothers, Bill Daly, who is involved with Green Lantern. He's going to come in, we're going to shuffle through this IMDb trivia to find out what is actually true, because any person can put shit on IMDb.
That's true.
So let's have an official person who was involved with it tell us, is it true or is it true bollocks?
Well, one of the worst things is that next week, not only do I have to watch whatever comes out of What in the Box later, but I also have to rewatch this.
Well, if you've not seen the extended version, watch the extended version. That way, at least you're picking out something new.
Oh, God.
Bill has been doing his research on it.
Yeah, well, that's Bill. He's a masochist.
Oh, trust me, I don't think he's going to be happy about doing this episode. He was just like, there are so many better films to talk about. I'm like, yeah, but none of these other films have actually came out that week. Yeah. So, God. There's going to be a point next month where we can talk about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and Twister, and all those movies that were released way back when. You cannot just point out that Warner Brothers did great movies. They did ones that weren't so great either, and they're the ones where we really want to talk about. Yeah,
Schadenfreude all the way.
Yes, Schadenfreude. So, well, I guess now that we've done our anniversary segment, we've done our What's in the Box recap, I guess it's time to move on and introduce our guest. Today's guest, we invited one of the most celebrated animation directors working today, as well as one of the industry's most respected storyboard artists. No, we didn't get two guests. This guy is just one. Over the course of his career, he's directed some of the most acclaimed animated features in the DC animated universe. That includes Justice League, The Flashpoint Paradox, Batman Assault on Arkham, which is a favourite of Steve's,
really
Justice League Dark, and of course, Batman The Dark Knight Returns. Now, he started his career at Fox working on the 1990s Spider-Man series, among others, before landing at Warner Animation, working on such shows as The Batman in the 2000s. From there, he's forged a career storyboarding for many huge blockbusters, including Deadpool, Thor Ragnarok, and of course, the Snyderverse. He now runs his own animation studio, Lexinotus, in Los Angeles, where the first anime series Trese has been released on Netflix. Of course, we're talking about the one and only Jay Oliva. Good morning, Jay. How's that post-release celebration morning working for you?
It's good. I feel like a rock star. I literally just feel like I just woke up.
You must have been dying, because I've heard about your schedule over the last few days, and it's just been intense.
Because this is an international release, I've had to do press junkets for Manila and Jakarta and other places. So a lot of times the press junkets go from like 10 p.m. my time till like 2:30, almost 3 a.m. So it's rough, but it's good. I wanted to be there for these press junkets as opposed to me sending in my answers. So it's fun.
Well, I had binged the show overnight. What many people may not know widely is that Trese is a well-regarded comic property. Mm-hmm. And it's a great introduction to the first 3 volumes of it in these first 6 episodes. How's the early feedback been, especially from fans of that source material?
With the source material, I think the fans they like the fact that like it's kind of familiar because because we're following the comics, but in other times we are totally going our own route.
I wasn't able to watch all of them yet, but I was able to watch the first couple of episodes.
Oh, that's fine.
And no, I really loved it so far. I love the characters. I particularly love the twins. Yeah. I think they're awesome.
Yeah, they're pretty great.
How hard was it to get such a big project finished during this unprecedented global pandemic?
We had finished pre-production around the time the pandemic was just building up. So, we were mostly just in post, so it wasn't too bad. I think the hardest thing was doing ADR during this period, just, trying to get the actors to come in and do the oofs and ughs. That's usually a challenge, but we figured out. I mean, I'm doing other productions as well, so luckily we had kind of figured out on those productions by the time that we had to do ADR for Trese. So it all worked out in the end, but it wasn't ideal. I miss being in a studio with the actors and being able to kind of feed off their energy, as opposed to being on like a Zoom call. Like this, right? It's hard for me to feed off of your guys' energy, right?
Really? Are we not giving out
Andrew,
enough energy?
Entertain me. Yes.
Yes, dance, monkey, dance.
Yes. Are you not entertained?
Usually I'm catching you at the end of a night, and I'm probably the reason why you used to stay up till 3 a.m.
Probably, yes, most likely.
Well, it does surprise me because I've heard a lot about the phone calls that you guys have had.
We can't talk about them here.
No, you can't talk about the content, no, but Andy said,
Yes.
oh, yeah, we're on the phone for about 3 or 4 hours last night, and the wife was just looking at me going, oh, God, is he still on the phone?
Well, what can we say? Well, I mean, what's so important to note here is you brought in the original comic artist, Keijo Badasimo?
Yeah.
Kajo.
Yeah, Kajo, yes.
I'm English. I'm going to get these names wrong.
Don't worry.
Because you're ignorant.
Because I'm ignorant. And the writer, here we go, Bujet Tan?
Yes, budget, yeah.
But God, you know what? That's what I was originally going to say as well. Bujet Tan. So they were on the show, which is obviously a major boost for the credibility in the eyes of the fans.
They're the creators of the comic. I consulted them from time to time if I had questions. I really asked them in the very beginning about like personality and kind of thing, but they kind of were very hands off. I mean, they let me basically kind of do whatever I wanted, which was good. But they knew that I wasn't going to go totally left field and change the spirit of the comic because that's not what I'm about.
The show itself takes place mostly in Manila. And
yes.
It's got just as much character as any of the other characters in the series, and the backgrounds themselves and some of the imagery that you had, particularly in the opening of that first episode, was just beautiful. Absolutely fantastically detailed. Kind of reminds me of some of the shots that I saw for the early publicity stuff for Cyberpunk 2077.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
But how much of the real city did you end up bringing into the fictional world?
Originally, my art director and I, Jojo Aguilar, we flew to Manila. We did a story summit in the very beginning, so it was myself and the writers. But on our first day of landing, they picked us up at the airport and they said, "Hey, do you guys want to like rest?" And I'm like, "No, let's go see the city." So they took us around to all of the different locations that are kind of covered in the comic, or as well as like haunted locations. So we went to like Balete Drive, which was that first opening in the first episode where, apparently you would see a white lady on the street and you're not supposed to stop and pick her up because apparently she, in different stories, like she either kills you or takes your soul or gives you a good time. I don't know.
Just like streets in Manchester.
Yeah,
then, really.
exactly. Yes. But anyways, there's basically a lot of different, mythologies and folklores that we kind of went to early on, and we've tried to visit some of the places that where the origin was from, and then what we did is we took a lot of photos. I tried to make sure I captured the feel of it. I mean, here's the thing: I wasn't born and raised in Manila in the Philippines. I was pretty much here in Los Angeles, so for me, Manila was a very romanticized city, right? It just, it's like London and me too. It's like, before ever going to London, I just knew about it from Charles Dickens, right? So,
and then you came here deeply disappointed.
Exactly, and I was like, hey, where are the dialects and where's the I'm looking for all of the Doctor Who stuff. Like I don't get this, So anyways, we traveled around. I tried to capture as much as I could. I mean, luckily, the fans and everything, especially the ones from the Philippines, haven't called me out on it because they said, it feels like it. I mean, it's still a fictionalized version of Manila. It's not really like, I'm not trying to make any political commentary about it, but I tried to capture the look and feel of the city and make it actually a character in the show, right? So that way, like, Gotham City to, Batman, I wanted to make Manila to be that important to the character of Alexander Trese and the team.
Does that include the breaking down of the train system?
Yes, apparently that happened. So here's what's funny is that they took me to the MRT is what they call it, and it's a raised train system. And we were, they took me during rush hour, so I got to enjoy the beauty of it being super packed, just like the Tube in London. But unlike the Tube in London, I believe it had air conditioning. So yes. I don't know how the Philippines, a third world country, has air conditioning in their MRT like subway system, and you guys still is hot.
But anyways, the main reason for that is just the amount of resentment of people on the tube, you're just feeling everybody's heat.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what powers the actual train? Is that why?
It is.
Is that what powers it? Okay, it's not solar powered. It's just like it's powered by the
Hate.
English. Just yes, the hate.
Anytime someone talks on the tube, the train picks up speed. You know, he's getting that extra
No
jolt.
wonder. No wonder. But anyways, back to my. So I wrote it, at peak, and it was packed. Not too bad. I've been actually in more packed trains. Like I've been on the trains in Tokyo where they literally like push you all the way in until like to the point where my feet were lifted off the ground at one point, and I was suspended by the bodies of all these Japanese people because that's how packed it was in that car, right? So anyways. So we rode the MRT, and while we were riding it, it was in between stations. They used to tell me like, "Oh, by the way, sometimes this thing breaks down." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, it breaks down. So what happens?" And they're like, "Well, they just open the doors and you just walk." And I'm like, "Wait, walk like?" Just walk. They're like, yeah, you just walk the tracks. And remember, these things are raised up off the ground like, I don't know, 15, 20 feet up. I mean, it's high enough that if you fall, I think you would die. And I thought that was just wild because, again, there are no like safety rails. There's nothing. It's just like, no, just walk. And it's basically walk and just be sure don't die, right? Whereas here in America, we have safety rails for everything because sure enough, someone's going to try to die, right? They're like, there's no rails here. I'm jumping, right? So after they told me that story, I turned to them. I was like, that's a cool opening. I was like, we're going to do this thing where the train breaks down in the middle of the night, and then they get attacked by the Aswang, which is like our version of a vampire.
Yeah, and it is a good opening as well.
Well, I know, as you mentioned, your Filipino roots obviously made this a hugely important project, first one out the door for your studio. And you also wanted to kind of encourage regular viewers to learn about the culture and the language, which is why the Filipino terminology is present in both the English and Japanese dubs. Is that correct?
Yes, it should be in all of the dubs. Because the spells and the expressions we should have, I think they should be in all of the. I haven't listened to the German version, by the way, but the trailer that I watched was still pretty legit. But I you know what, I have to check on the spells. But from my understanding, the spells still stayed the same in all of the dubs.
Yes, just in the German one, they shout it a lot more.
Yes.
I love Germany, been there many a time, but I will say this, it is not a romantic language by any stretch of the imagination.
But I don't know if you guys know this, but the Germans take their dubbing like seriously. Like they like to do legit dubs of different movies, and to the point where it's an art form over there. Like so, I forgot who my buddy was telling me about how he grew up on American films that were dubbed in German. And he didn't even know that they were American films until much later in his life because he just thought they were all because they did such a good job of matching the lips and the translations that it looked like a German film. So I was like, I wanted to go see that. I want to see like Weekend at Bernie's in German, see how close they were able to make it. So.
You touched on the kind of monsters and ghosts and creatures of all descriptions that were in the show. And there's a lot of them which are drawn directly from Filipino folklore and superstition. Which ones are your favourite and which one's the most interesting to adapt into the show?
Oddly enough, my favorite one isn't really in the show, mostly because, and this is why you'll probably agree with me. So it's called the Manananggal, right? That's a mouthful. Trying to spell it is also pretty interesting. But basically, the Manananggal is usually like a woman. It varies depending on who's telling the story in the region, but it could be a very beautiful woman or just a regular woman. But they look like regular people walking around. But when it comes to the nighttime, what they do is they split from their body. Well, okay, they sprout wings, number one. And they split from their bodies so that way their entrails are just hanging down on the upper half, right? And they fly around looking looking for pregnant women and then they have this long tongue that extends out from their mouth that basically kind of injects into the woman's belly and feeds on the embryo or on the baby. And this is kind of a way that they would explain like miscarriages or early births, is because the Manananggal had gotten to the baby. The crazy part is that in order to fight the Manananggal or defeat it, you have to find the lower half and you have to sprinkle salt on the exposed lower half of the body, so that when the Manananggal tries to connect back to itself, it can't, because apparently salt prevents it, and then it'll eventually die because it can't reconnect.
I think there was a film, I think it was called Mystics of Bali, a really, really like crappy late 70s, early 80s B-movie where that happened.
A lot of the mythologies from the Philippines, there are counterparts in other parts of the world, like in Southeast Asia, for example. There are different, they're just called different things. But as for me, the Manananggal, as a kid, I remember hearing the stories and just thinking, this is the most batshit crazy thing I've ever heard. This is awesome. And so on the series, I didn't really feature them, mostly because I know that it needs its own episode, just because, I think if we did it for the Filipino audiences, they'll be like, yeah, we know the Manananggal. But trying to explain that concept to Western audiences, I think I need to have an episode to just be like, okay, white people, let me explain this to you. There's some crazy shit, right? And I'm going to explain it like this. So we have to. So if we do get another season or seasons, I'm hoping to kind of elaborate that.
Well, Trese is undoubtedly one of the largest representations for Filipino anime that's hit the mainstream so far. Talk of it has been everywhere. It's kind of opened eyes to the excitement of this growing creativity and artistry from this part of the world. So do you think this is now going to grow support from more local audiences and authorities with the showcase of talent they have? What do you think the future holds for animation from the Philippines?
It's funny. I didn't really realize how a momentous this title was until I started doing press junkets and realizing that this was the first anime or animated series made for international audiences, right? It's not just made just for the Philippines, even though it has the Philippines as the major, this is the audience that we're appealing to. So it wasn't until the press junkets that I realized how much is on the shoulders of this series in order for it to hopefully open doors for other content from other Filipinos, whether it's here in America or in the Philippines, and also open up more stories coming from the Philippines that can be for mainstream audiences. I mean, look at Korean cinema, right? 50 years ago, I can't think of any Korean films, right, that I knew. Ever since the 80s and the 90s, there had been a steady stream of really good Korean films and live action, of course, and that has opened the door to, of course, with Parasite winning an Oscar, right? So I'm hoping that this can kind of change the way the world sees Filipino stories and Filipino cinema, and hoping that in the Philippines, they with the attention this show is getting, that this leads to a lot of doors opening for a lot of people.
Well, this is it's the first project from your studio, Lexinotus, and I've been down since day one. I've seen you build this studio from the ground up with some of the best people in the animation industry, whether it be Jojo, Chris Lazinski, David. Of course, we love David Hartman, and this surely holds a lot of excitement for everyone on the team and all the projects that you've now got in development.
Yeah, everybody's great. We started in January of 2019 on Trese. We finished pre-production in about March of 2020. And then we did post till about January of this year. So January 2021, we delivered all 6 episodes. So Netflix takes this time to basically do all of the rest of the dubbing. There's some quality control, and then the team ended up being split up to all of the other productions that I have. So They're all doing well, at least, I hope so. There's no bodies buried in the backyard yet, but we're doing well. We've got multiple productions. Two of them I'm doing with Zack Snyder. I've got a couple other that are doing with other clients. So we're actively pitching and developing a lot of projects. So it's going well. The team has grown from, I believe, 7 people. I mean, we had 7 artists, 1 production, so 8. To almost 100 now, I think. The last time I checked, there's a lot of there's a lot of people that have been hired during the pandemic that I've not even met in person.
It works on both the DC Cinematic Universe and also on the MCU.
Yes.
Most notably probably Thor Ragnarok, which was just a magnificently, brilliantly visual and really kooky film to watch.
Yeah.
How did you find the process differing between the two studios?
With the MCU, with Kevin Feige, I had worked with him a long time ago before he was who he is. When he was one of the executives on the Marvel animated films that we did with Lionsgate. It was a Lionsgate Marvel Films studio, and that was where I first met Kevin. He was like an early exec. I don't think he was I think he was like a junior executive. He wasn't even the main exec. I think what he learned with that whole process, I can't remember how many movies we did, but we, of course, storyboarded everything out. They made notes, and we addressed it. And that's very similar to how he runs the Marvel division of Disney. With Thor Ragnarok, I worked directly with Taika. Taika's great, super funny, and to the point where, like, after what we do in Shadows, when that movie came out, it was while I was in production on Thor with him, I could not look at him the same way because I kept seeing him as a vampire that's in the movie, and I just could not, it was just so hard to keep a straight face. But anyway, so I would work with Taika directly. He'd give me his kind of ideas for a sequence. Of course, I'd have the script, I have all the models, I start storyboarding it. Once I get it to where Taika's kind of happy with it, then we pitch it to Kevin. And so I usually make an animatic. I time it out. Sometimes I'll throw music on it, but I'll just, because I do that all the time for animation. So I'll time it out, and we just show it to Kevin, and then he gives us notes. And that's kind of a very different situation. Whereas for the DC EU, working on those shows, I think I had a very unique position because I worked not only with Zack Snyder, I worked with a lot of the other directors on the DCEU. So I was working with Rick Famuyiwa on the Flash shows. On the Flash movie, I was working with Ben Affleck, of course, on his Batman movie. I was working with Patty Jenkins on Wonder Woman. So I was working with pretty much all of the directors. I didn't work on Aquaman, and I didn't work on Shazam, and I didn't work on David Ayer on Suicide Squad, unfortunately. But for those 4 directors, I think it's 4, the process was kind of like the kind of old school Hollywood style. It was still where I worked directly with the director, and I would do my sequences, and I would turn it in. They'd give me revisions, and then that's it. I wasn't pitching this to the head of the division. I wasn't doing it to Jeff Johns or John Berga, who's the other. It was the president and vice president of the DC thing at the time. So I wasn't doing that. It was just mostly directly to the directors. So that's a difference. That's a big difference, I think, is that there wasn't somebody like a Kevin to kind of oversee the individual movies. That's kind of in a nutshell. Other than that, I've done superhero stuff for a very long time. I honed my craft doing the animated stuff, so by the time I ended up doing the live action, big screen versions, I was mostly like, cool, this is going to be very expensive, but let's try this, right? So for me, it wasn't really, it was just, it's like fitting into a glove. It was something that I had already done before. And I like working in live action because, well, you get paid a lot better, number one. Number two is the schedule is a little bit more forgiving. With movies like my Dark Knight Returns, or when I was on a series like Young Justice, a lot of times the fight choreography for those shows are worked out within a week. And I'm drawing it out, trying to get it done in such a short time frame. Whereas the movies, I tend to have a couple months, to work it out. But of course, sometimes I'll finish it early, but then, I'll have the initial idea done, but then I'll have a lot of time for refinement to really kind of work it out, so that way the VFX artists and the stuntmen know exactly what I'm going for. But unlike the animated stuff, I'm only working on sequences here and there, whereas for the animated stuff, I'm working on almost everything. I mean, of course, when you're a storyboard artist, you're only working on sections, but when I'm directing, of course, I'm looking at the whole thing, so it's a little bit more responsibility. When I do stuff with Zach, I'll finish a sequence, and then he'll be like, this looks cool, and I'll be like, okay, I'm handing it off to you. Good luck trying to shoot this, right? Because, that still needs to get translated, where when I draw it for animation, they just, for the most part, use my boards as a kind of a template, and they usually draw on top of it, fix it, and then animate from there, So it's a little bit more one-to-one, whereas when Zach and the other live-action directors have to shoot my boards, they have to figure out, okay, how do we do this without killing the stuntmen? Or how do we do this in such a... Because, sometimes the stuff I come up with is a little dangerous for the stunt team.
Well, when we first met, it was after I'd been to Warner Animation. I was meeting with another friend there, Mike Deesa, who had invited me along. You were established there as the director on the DC Animated Universe by that point. I believe you were between Justice League War and Batman Assault on Arkham around that time. So how different is it now approaching source material on something like Trese as it was to handle this huge machine that is the world of DC?
Let's see. That's a good question. I mean, with the DC stuff, or even Marvel for that matter, there's been multiple versions of these characters and these stories, because, both those characters have been around for 75 plus years, For Trese, it's only been around since maybe about 2007. There hasn't been as many iterations of it, whereas, with the DC and Marvel stuff, usually as soon as a new artist and writer combination comes in, they tend to throw out the old stories and come with something new. With this one, the artist and the writer, the creators had, basically been the only ones to actually do this comic and do a version of this comic, right? So there was no other version done by another artist or writer that's been done before. So I was the first person to kind of really come in and do my interpretation of it. So in some ways, it was a little bit nerve-wracking just because I wanted to make sure I get this right, because no one else had done it before. But in other ways, I felt it as an honor, out of all the artists out there or filmmakers, I'm the one who gets the first crack at this. So I think for me, it was a little bit of a challenge because I wanted this to be so perfect, and we didn't have a lot of time. We only had 6 episodes to get this right. We only did the first 3 volumes of the comic, and I think they were up to volume 7 at that point. So there was a lot of story already done. But the thing is that with those comics, and the writer Budget will attest to this, is that there was no end game. They hadn't really planned out the big overarching story. He had ideas of what he wanted to do as a writer and what kind of stories to tell, but how those stories all tied together into the arc of the character, the overall arc of the series, it was still kind of up in the air. For me, as the showrunner and director of the series, I had to look at the source material and ask myself, okay, what are the common threads? What is the first season going to entail? What is the character arcs? How do we tie some of these cases together? Because it is a procedural, right? And I wanted to do a thing where they investigated what seemed to be these incidents non-connected, but then you find out at the end that there is a common thread throughout all of them, and it leads ultimately to the final showdown. The only thing that I wasn't quite sure of was the personality of Alexandra Trese. How is she? There's one way that I would read the comic in my head. There's another way that the creators intended her to be. But after talking to Budget, I would basically said, what's her personality? What's she like, and everything. And he's like, well, she's very reserved and stoic. She's a lot like Bruce Wayne, Batman. I'm like, okay, cool. I know that, right? I've done a lot of Batman. So if there's anybody who knows Batman, I think I should say that I know that. So one of the things I did, though, is I wanted her to be this kind of strong, stoic kind of character like Batman, right? Very much like Batman when she's, on the cases and stuff. But there's moments where she's alone, which I put in the first episode, which I think, Steve, you might have seen at the end of the first episode, where she kind of washes her face and looks herself into the mirror. And then that's when the phone calls in, and her Captain Guerrero says that we've got another case, and then we cut away. So what I wanted to do is I basically lifted that from Casino Royale, right? I love the idea of Bond doing that fight in that stairwell, and then he has to basically recompose himself and then go back and go play cards, right? And that was something that I really liked. I wanted to show the kind of humanity of this person, of Alexandra, is that like she sees some crazy shit and she has to keep it together, but when she's alone, that's the only time where she can let her guard down. And that's something that, as a Filipino, and I think that's something that we do a lot, where we have to be perfect all the time, right? Our parents are always saying like, why aren't you bringing home all A's? You bring in all A's, and they're like, why aren't these all A pluses? You bring in A pluses, and they're like, why isn't this all honors, right? So it's this constant like perfection that our parents are constantly beating down into us, which I get why they do it, but as a kid, like it's very stressful. And it's the idea of one of the things I wanted to touch upon as a theme for the series was about, of course, family, but family duty, right? And also, what happens when that's different from what you want for yourself, right? And then how do you balance that? When I was growing up, my parents said, you be a doctor. And I said, okay, right? There was no, like, in Filipino households, rarely is there ever a discussion where they say, you can do whatever you want to do, honey, right? And we'll support it, right? It's more like, you need to do this because this is what it's going to make money or whatever. So I think that was what I wanted to touch upon in the series, is like who Alexandra Trese and who she is as a woman doing this job, and and the emotional take on her. But the fact that she has this duty to her family, like, because her family has been basically doing this job for a very long time. She's the protector of the city. Lives are at stake because she has to be there to protect everyone. I mean, that's some heavy stuff for anybody to kind of, put on their shoulders. So I wanted to make sure that was, one of the kind of overall themes. I mean, of course, 6 episodes. You're basically getting a very little taste of the world and how deep we go with the character. Of course, if we get more seasons, we already have plans of really elaborating and kind of really deep diving into her character more and the world.
I know that you and Andy, you guys have been friends for a while, and
I don't know if we'd call it friends. It'd be more like frenemies, right? Right?
You tolerate each other.
We do.
Yes.
As much as possible. We do it really well.
I know you two have also been kind of working on a few things together yourselves.
Yes.
Are you looking at moving away from animation and into live action? Is that something that you're looking on in the future?
Quite a few years ago, I was already planning on my exit strategy from animation to live action, mostly because at that point in my career, I had kind of hit the ceiling of where I could go as an animation director. Animation director, you're still basically working from gig to gig. The only next step would be for me to develop my own kind of series and try to pitch it and go from there, right? And maybe be a showrunner or executive producer, which is usually the next step from where you are a director. But I kind of saw myself at the ceiling of where I could go, and at the time, the animation industry wasn't booming like it is now, with the streamers like Netflix and Amazon really taking its chances on shows like Invincible or Castlevania. So at the time, most of the stuff was like, hey, you can do Scooby-Doo and, the WWE or stuff like that, where it's like, okay, do I really want to work on another Scooby-Doo or the 10th version of Spider-Man or whatever? I mean, I was having fun working on the DC animated stuff, because we were working on we were translating the graphic novels, like we were translating like Dark Knight Returns or Flashpoint Paradox. So those to me were fun. Of course, that list starts getting less and less every year of what kind of titles you want to work in. So that's why I thought to myself, well, I'm already doing this live action stuff. But the thing is, I didn't want to do live action storyboards because, I could do that anytime. What I wanted to do is live action directing, but that's hard. It's hard. And the easiest route is to write something and then attach yourself to it and say, hey, I'll write it and I'll forego either my directing fee or my writing fee to be attached to this. And the studio gets a 2-for-1, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is that I'm not a writer, right? So when I was talking to Andrew, I was like, hey man, let's just write something together, right? Let's just do something together. So, we collaborated on a lot of stuff, but that's kind of why I wanted to kind of get out of animation. Now, fast forward, right? I didn't think in my wildest dreams I'd own an animation studio, so I kind of jumped, and instead of just show running one show, I'm show running I think 5 shows now, right? So I've kind of from that time to now, I've kind of like jumped, at least in my career in animation. Live action, I'm still doing, I'm still helping out on storyboarding on films every now and then if a director calls that I want to work with. I'm still I've got like live action series and live action movies that my studio is developing. There's a project that Andrew and I are working on that are projects that we've got that I want to eventually start shooting someday. So the future looks bright in terms of where I'll be 5 years. Hopefully in 5 years from now, you'll be like, so Jay, you've done 5 live action films and 25 animated series. What are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm going to Disneyland, right? I'm hoping that's that's what it's going to be for our 5-year podcast.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yes. There you go, Mum. I do work.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, just going back to Dark Knight Returns, it's one of the greats of the comic book industry. You've got that, you've got Batman Year One, and probably the Killing Joke are probably the 3 biggest and most influential ones in sculpting the character that we know today. So, how daunting was it to take on such an iconic project like that?
It's daunting when you think about it, right? When you think about it, like, holy shit, this is something that's so beloved. You got to get this right. But I like challenges, right? I love working on shows like that as opposed to like something that's totally original and maybe I'm not quite into, right? No, don't get me wrong. There are projects that like are original that I hear about that I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I want to work on this. But when you get like Dark Knight Returns, for example, or Flashpoint Paradox, like that's something that as a filmmaker, it's like a dream job. There are a lot of people who would kill to work on it, right? Now, I didn't know this back then, but apparently back before I did my film, people used to call The Dark Knight Returns as being unfilmable, right? It was, there's no way you can translate the Frank Miller's, grittiness and all that kind of stuff, the tone into a cartoon, let alone a live action film. Of course, that's when I'm like, hold my beer, right? Like, let me show you. And see, that's the challenge. I like that, but I didn't hear about that until after. Like, I remember I was doing the press junkets for Dark Knight Returns, and he said, "How does it feel to film the unfilmable?" I'm like, I didn't know that. Nobody told me that.
That was probably why you did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was probably why. Now, there were some challenges for that, for example, is because, when you read The Dark Knight Returns again, you go through it, it's a Frank Miller fever dream. Like, it's pretty deep. So there's a lot of panels and instances where I'm like, I don't quite know what's going on here, right? Like, there's a scene where he just comes out of a flashback of seeing his parents killed, and then it's raining, or is he in the shower? All right, and there's a scene where he's naked and he's standing in what appears to be the rain or a shower, because in his hand it looks like he has this sudsy thing that could be considered a bar of soap, or it could be just the raindrops hitting his hand. And I remember, my team and I, we were going back and forth of like, what exactly is that panel about? Like, and I just thought, well, it's kind of weird that after his parents are killed, he just feels like he has to take a shower, right? And so I ended up changing it, but still keeping the spirit where in the movie he has this flashback, and that's when he was seeing it on a TV, right? And then he sees himself on the TV, and then he runs outside onto the balcony, and it starts raining, and then he starts having the flashback to his parents getting killed, because I wanted to associate the rain with the death of his parents, and also how, later on that becomes his baptism, right? It's like, that's how it is in the books. So I tried to connect the two in such a way that you don't remember that naked panel of Bruce Wayne. Well, everything's up to interpretation, right? I mean, I couldn't call up Frank Miller and say, hey, Frank, what's up with this bar of soap, right? I mean, I don't have that kind of relationship. And plus, the production was like, we just have to keep moving, right? So I just had to already have it all planned out.
Well, last week we held a feature on our show called Get It Freshed, where we both would take turns selecting films not certified fresh that we feel should be. And Steve picked Man of Steel between his choices, which naturally you storyboarded. And we can't escape having you on here without having at least one little something about the Snyderverse, of which you were an integral figure in the Restore the Snyderverse movement initially. Here we are, 2021. Zack Snyder's Justice League's finally been released to critical and fan acclaim. I know it's something huge for you personally after so much work you put in to see it finally realized.
I mean, here's the thing. I knew it was always going to come out. How soon it would come out, I didn't really know because I'm not a studio exec. But it made sense from a business standpoint that you have a streaming service, you have something that is potentially pretty much almost done. Of course, it needed some money. I know a lot of people are like, see, look, it still needed X amount of millions. I'm like, dude, it's expensive. I'm expensive. Just the storyboarders for me, I'm pretty expensive. So if they're gonna like do some VFX stuff or do some reshoots or do what, it's gonna cost money, right? And they kept saying like, well, because of we thought it was 100% done and blah blah blah. I'm like, yeah, we shot everything. There's still some stuff that needs to be done. Like you still need to do either ADR, you do color correction. I mean, they don't understand the process, right? And that's why, like on Twitter, I would jump on and just kind of like call people out for basically spreading disinformation about the Snyder Cut or even just how films are made, right? It's just ridiculous. Films now are edited the same day they're shot, right? I mean, the director and his film crew is still shooting while they're sending the footage to the editor, and he's cutting it into the timeline. And then, of course, the director sits in at the end of the day and looks at the dailies. So by the end of shooting principal photography, there's already a cut. And that's why I kept trying to explain to people, listen, you're talking out of your ass, number one. And number two, there is a cut. There's multiple cuts. I mean, there's, even for my films, there is a Jay Oliva cut of Dark Knight Returns, right? It's not as extensive as, what you saw on Zack's stuff, but there are scenes that we cut or things that we trimmed just because the animation didn't come back the way we wanted it, or we realized that pacing-wise it was dragging and we needed to kind of lose it for pacing. So there's a lot of different reasons why. But people just don't understand that, yeah, there are different cuts. And in live action, there's multiple upon multiple cuts because you have to screen it for the studio execs.
Yeah.
You get notes, you do it, you recut it again, screen it again, get notes, redo it again. So by the time 4, 5, even 6, or even more versions of the cut is done, finally when it's all agreed upon of where it's going and the execs are happy, that's when you plan for reshoots because, some exec might be like, well, you really need a scene where Lois Lane gets in a car and drives away. And so we're like, okay, fine. Let's put that in reshoot. It was never planned on it, but when you're looking at the footage, you're like, okay, well, we need a kind of a scene in between these two scenes in order to kind of add traveling shot or something like that. So that happens all the time, everywhere. But of course, everyone was just pointing fingers as if like, oh, see, that's proof the Snyder Cut doesn't exist. And I'm just like, okay, if it doesn't exist, then why was I in London for almost 2 months, right? Well, it's ridiculous to think that this doesn't exist when clearly, like, they spent a lot of money, they've shot it all. I was there for the last shot, and they did the last shot here in LA. I was there for that, right? So I knew what was there. I mean, I knew all the scenes that Darkseid was in. I mean, I had boarded a lot of those sequences. Of course, I couldn't tell anybody. But I had to just tell people, like, listen, what you saw in the Joss Whedon cut was just a small percentage of what was actually there. For me, I only worked on quite a few big sequences in the movie, so it wasn't as extensive as, let's say, Man of Steel or Batman v Superman, where I was with Zack for a very long time. They always bring me in when Zack's busy, which thank God, because for Justice League, Zack had already storyboarded pretty much most of the movie, but they had some new sequences that needed to be done, and he was like, I'm shooting, there's no way I have time to draw this. So of course that's when they call me, so that's why I'm always happy. In my mind, whenever Zack is shooting, I'm always praying that I hope he's late, I hope he's busy, because then I get a call and I get to play with him. I get to have fun in this world. Just because there's a DC movie doesn't mean that I'm naturally going to be on it. The director still has to like me. There's a lot of things that I'm just an afterthought, right? I'm just a storyboard artist. They're trying to worry about, like, the actors, their schedules and all these different things. It's spinning plates, right? When you're the director. So for me, having been a part of it for all those movies back then was, kind of unique because I'd set the tone with Man of Steel with Zach, and I was continuing it with Rick and Ben and Patty, on their films, and it was fun. And I really wish the fans would have gotten seen those versions because those versions were pretty awesome. Of course, you saw Wonder Woman with Patty. Ben's version of Batman and Rick's Flash, I thought, were pretty amazing. I was saddened to hear that both of those projects were shelved.
Well, we do have some quick fire questions from some Reddit users that Steve has kind of sourced. But before that, I know you have some incredible projects ahead. Obviously announced is the Army of the Dead Lost Vegas. And now we've heard about Twilight of the Gods, both with Zack Snyder, which have been announced this week. So what can people expect here?
I think for those two projects, I mean, it's more Zack Snyder, Jay Oliva goodness, I would say. It's fun. I basically gave Zack a call and said, hey, you want to do animation? He's done Guardians of Garwold, but that's a feature, and feature is quite a different beast. But he wanted to help me out, and he said, sure, let's try it. So we had originally signed on to the Norse series, Twilight of the Gods first, but because Army of the Dead, the live action, ended up getting greenlit, and they wanted us to do a prequel animated series, we just switched them. So we did Army of the Dead Las Vegas first, which we are in the pretty much almost done with, at least the pre-production side. And then we are going to be, I think, promoting that maybe later this year or early next year, hopefully. It's looking really good. And then the Norse stuff, the Twilight of the Gods, of course, we just did the cast announcement. That's not the full cast. It was actually a much longer roster. So we have that. I'm also showrunning Arc, the animated series, which
yes.
I believe the trailer came out last year. So that show is pretty much almost done. We are, and that's going to be hopefully coming to a streamer or network near you guys at some point very soon.
With an incredible cast attached to that also.
Yes, it's one of those moments where I look around and I ask myself, how could I be in a recording booth with Russell Crowe? Now, of course, because of COVID, he wasn't there, but the fact that I'm in a project with him and, of course, Carl Urban and Jeffrey Wright and Michelle Yeoh, I mean, the list goes on and on. We did Malcolm McDowell, I was just like, Jesus, this guy's, it's Clockwork Orange, right? And he's so good. So yeah, that project to me was very special because it allowed me to work with talent that I would have never had access to ever in my career. So I when that comes out, I hope you guys, we'll do a follow-up podcast or something, but it's pretty fun and it's pretty amazing and a badass animated series.
Okay, well, we look forward to that. I definitely will have to watching a number of your things over the years, not least of which was Assault on Arkham, which I really enjoyed.
Oh, I'm glad you like that one.
But for now, we've got a few questions which have been sent in from a
Sure.
couple of the users on Reddit. But
Sure.
we've got Jay Stormtrooper wants to know, you talked about a sequel for Batman Assault on Arkham. Can you elaborate on what the potential plot line was going to be?
I think it was pretty badass, but no, they have to campaign Warner Brothers to basically reach out to me to do the sequel. Sorry, it was pretty good. I think because they ended up doing the Hell to Pay, but that one was a sequel, but not quite sequel because it was set in the New 52 universe, whereas my Assault on Arkham was purely in the Arkham video game universe. And what I was doing, I was kind of following where the video games were kind of going, if that was any hint. But like I said, I think it would have been pretty badass, but I can't really reveal much.
Next, we've got Deathlight 7000. God, I love Reddit usernames, I really do. They ask, I don't know who it is. Are there any plans for a shared DC animated universe, or are they just going to continue being standalone movies?
I don't know. I haven't worked at DC Warner Brothers since 2016, so I have no clue. When I was there, we used to do standalone movies, and then the public used to cry out and say, why aren't they connected? So then we started connecting them in the New 52 stuff, and then they started crying, why aren't they doing standalones? So, it's like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So, I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. Can't argue with that. Nightwing 612 asks a Young Justice question. And wants to know if you can go into any more detail regarding which characters you couldn't use for Series 1.
That's a better question for the executive producers and writer, like, Greg Wiseman and Brandon Vietti. I was a series director, so I had no say in the development. They just handed me the scripts and says, here it is, make this awesome. So I really had no say. Most of the stuff that I was trying to do is I basically was going to the creative team and saying, these scripts are really long. Can we cut something out? And they're like, no, everything's gold. So so that's why those shows, if you watch it, like there's a lot packed into it. It's wall to wall, everything in there, from the teenage angst to fight sequences to setting up storylines that are going to pay off 3 seasons later. Like, it was like machine gun fire of like content. So I really didn't have any say whatsoever. I was just trying to just survive and just get through the season, because it was a lot of stuff we had to do that first season to set up. So unfortunately, sorry, I don't really know what else. We're how many seasons in now? I think they've basically tried to hit every single DC character ever created, as well as some that people didn't know even existed. So I think they've done a pretty good job of trying to get to pretty much every single character at this point.
Okay, next we've got, I don't even know if this is supposed to be a word, but you got ZJG 21198.
Nice.
Says,
I think his cat walked across the keyboard.
Nice. I like that. That's a great.
It says, first of all, telling congratulations on a great first season.
Cool.
And they're hoping for a release of the soundtrack. Is there any news on when that's going to get released?
Oh, that's a good question. I do know that the end title song by UDD, or Up Dumb or Down, will be coming out, released on its own. I think you can buy it on like Spotify or whatever service you've got. The actual soundtrack that's been done by the Kiners, which is Kevin Kiner and his 2 sons, Sean and Dean, who are all composers. I got a 3-for-1 deal on that one. I don't know exactly when and if they're going to release it. I mean, the thing with Netflix is that they're in charge of everything. So, you can get the soundtracks for all my films. Like they always, I don't know if Warner Music or if there's another other outside company that releases all of the soundtracks, but they do it for every single one. Do you guys happen to know if any of the soundtracks of the Netflix originals have ever been released on anything?
I think it has for Stranger Things.
Oh, has it?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think Bloodline did as well.
Okay, good. So there's precedent. So if at least one of those shows had it, then I think there's a good chance that they would.
Okay, we've just got one more,
Sure.
and that is nice and simple. Black Pierce wants to know if the episodes will be longer next series.
Well, if you look at it, the episodes they're longer than the standard 22s. We got some episodes that are about 30 minutes long. So, do they want hour-long episodes?
I think they want more, yeah.
So, here's the thing. I'd like to get a bigger order of episodes. Now, will the episodes be longer? I mean, I think 30 minutes is probably the max you're going to get for the kind of what we're doing. I don't foresee us doing hour-long like Invincible. Hour-long animation is really hard to pace out. Again, if Netflix said, Jay, we want to do hour-long and here's the money and schedule to back it up, I'd be like, awesome. Most likely they won't do that. So I'd expect them to give us hopefully a green light for a second season, and then hopefully the order for the second season is substantial, so that way I can kind of spread out and pace it in a way that it's longer, right? I mean, I had only 6 episodes, and I had one shot of doing this series, so I've read that some people are kind of like criticizing the fact that it's too short and this, and I'm like, dude, all we got were 6 episodes. I was like, do you remember Castlevania had 4 episodes when it first started? So, I had to play within these parameters, right? And I had to try to find a storyline within the original comics that fit within the 6 episodes that had, a payoff at the end, that had that character arcs in there. I wish I had more, but hopefully, hopefully we get a big order, and then I can satisfy everybody, and people will be saying, there's too many episodes, they should have cut it down. Right? It'll be like, it's either too short or too long. Very rarely do you ever hit a sweet spot.
Well, Trese is absolutely amazing on 6 episodes. Much
Thanks.
better than Castlevania on his 4 episodes. But when it comes down to animation, we all want to know if you can just nominate 5.
Now's the time to nominate 5.
Nominate 5?
Yes, nominate 5. Not 3 or 4 or 6 or 9. Now's the time to nominate 5.
Eat that, Steve. That is the best one yet.
Yeah, that scared me when it came on. I thought at first I thought it was like, did I leave my TV on? It's like, what's going on? So yeah,
We still fail to let our guests know that this music is coming on. We genuinely thought that David Zucker had left.
yeah. I thought it was a commercial. I thought it was a commercial break. I thought it was gonna be something for like tampons. Like for that time of the month. I literally thought that there was a commercial going on right now.
Buy new Krelm toothpaste.
Yes, like you guys should sing along. So I would suggest in the future you should sing along to it, so that way the talent or the person you're interviewing is like, oh, I see, it's part of the show.
Well, this is the first time we've had a guest laugh while the tune is going on, so we've actually got that in there now.
Nice.
So nominate 5. This is where we ask our guest to nominate 5 personal favorites in kind of a chosen category. And obviously, having a godfather of animation here, we've got to ask Jay Oliva what top 5 anime movies he would recommend for everyone out there who may not have seen them to go and find out. And we do this in a kind of countdown that never works.
Never.
But we're going to try our best. We're going to start. What's at number 5?
Okay, there's a lot of really good ones. I would say Street Fighter 2, the movie.
Oh, genius.
Oh, yeah. I really like that
brilliant.
one.
We love that movie. And why?
Well, it's awesome. Like it's I think it's the best translation of Street Fighter ever. I mean, I think there's been series after that. I think they did Alpha and some other stuff, but that one, like that opening scene where it's Ryu and Sagat. Oh my god, and the lightning going on. It's just it's awesome. And then
it is genius.
It's really good. And then of course there's so many good set pieces. Chun-Li versus Vega. You got it's just there's so much goodness in that thing.
Kicked the ass off the Jean-Claude Van Damme Street Fighter movie that was released at the same time. Which is a
Change the
personal favourite
channel.
of me and Steve. We knew they would get that in one episode. Okay, number 4.
Most of these lists will have like the usuals, so I'm going to avoid the usual stuff except for maybe 1 or 2. But I would say Robot Carnival.
Oh, cool. I've not heard that one in a long time.
I've not heard of it at all. Tell us
yeah.
more.
Robot Carnival is pretty awesome. It's an older one though. It's hard to try to find, but if you can find it, it's pretty awesome.
Okay, well, you'll have to sort that one out, Steve. That's one for another episode. Okay, number 3.
This one's an easy one. It's Kiki's Delivery Service. That's probably my favorite of the Ghibli.
Jeez.
I mean, I love Mononoke and Howl's Moving Castle and of course Totoro, but I think Kiki's is nice. It's a nice feel good movie, and it's just animated so well, and it I think creates a world that I want to live in, and I think that's why I like it for what it is. It's a really top to bottom, like it's solid.
Beautiful. Number 2.
Number 2, of course, would be Ninja Scroll.
Oh, genius.
Yeah, that's my one that I'd be like, okay, it's usually in most people's lists, like Ghost in the Shell and Akira, and Ninja Scroll's usually there, but that would be my number 2.
I actually watched it again for the first time in about 15 years the other day.
Nice.
And it's still brilliant, still brilliantly animated.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I think it was one of the first ones that I saw that really threw me off on just like how violent it was. Even that opening scene, like I remember that rock guy, he like rips his arms off and he's drinking the blood or something. I can't remember, but like my mouth was just dropped. That whole sequence, like, am I watching this right? This is awesome. But the action sequences, I think that was Madhouse at its prime. Like the Madhouse, the animation studio was just like that was a huge hit for them.
Okay, so what goes into the number 1?
Number 1's easy. It's Your Name. It's Makoto Shinkai's film, Your Name. I don't know if it came out a couple years ago. It's the body-swapping, teen romance, time travel. Jesus, there's so many other things that it combines where on paper it shouldn't work, But when you watch the film, you're like, Jesus Christ, how could they have crafted this thing in this way? And it's so effective. But it's my all-time favorite. It's so good.
And I have not actually seen this yet, so now I'm going to go and hunt this one down myself.
It was the top-grossing film for Japan for a while, but I think it got dethroned a couple years ago. But it actually, like, toured around the world. And, like, I saw it here in L.A., They actually did screenings here in LA, and it was, and the screenings were all sold out. I mean, it's really, really good. And if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. You know, that director Makoto Shinkai he's amazing. And in fact, one of his trademarks is like, you know, other than like these kind of really personal stories about the trials and tribulations of the characters he covers, but his backgrounds are beautiful. They're almost photoreal, where they look like photos, but they're, of course, you know, stylized and painted. And that's where I kind of took my kind of cue from for Trese, where I wanted the backgrounds of Manila to have that painterly quality, but also that familiarity. When you see it, you're like, oh, that looks like, you know, this particular street in Manila, right? And that's what he does a lot in his films, is that he captures Tokyo in such a way that it's very artistic and very beautiful.
No, definitely. I am going to check that out. Jay, as always, thank you so much for coming on with us today. Absolute pleasure having you here.
It really has been great.
Thanks for having me on. I know my answers are long, so maybe you guys can edit it down, but yeah, It was a fun time.
Nice, wonderful.
We don't edit this down. We keep it all nice, tight, and square.
Yes. Oh, nice.
Speaking of which, Steve, what's in the box?
What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box?
So is that Steve singing? Is that you, Steve? Because it doesn't sound like Andrew.
No, that's
I think if Andrew,
this guy called Neil.
Oh, okay. Because Andrew can't carry a tune unless it's like, you know, some drinking, you know, pub song, I guess.
I couldn't carry a tune if it had a handle on it.
Well, nice. I'm actually a bit pissed off there because I had a great little segue that I was going to use Kiki's delivery service and having a box.
I'm sorry, I took out.
No, Andy ruined it. He ruined it.
I took your steam, but I don't know. Here's the thing: I think I saved you because you don't ever want to put Kiki and box in the same sentence, so I wouldn't do that.
Okay, fair enough.
You were saved. Okay, Steve. Explain the rules. What's in the box?
Okay, then. This is a segment of the show where Andy tries to teach me about good movies. Now, basically, I tend to watch a lot of movies with car chases and big explosions and the big popcorn fodder, and Andy's trying to get me into more diverse cinematic fare. So basically...
Diverse, is that in quotes? Because Andrew's taste in films are quite colored.
Well, it's been definitely diverse so far. We've gone from the likes of About Schmidt, we've gone to Surf's Up, then over the last 2 weeks we've watched Teeth and Casualties of War. So yes, it's definitely been diverse. So basically Andy's going to put his hand into a box and he's going to pull out a name of a film, and this film is certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. If I have seen it, then it goes to one side and he picks out another one until we find one that I haven't seen, and then I go away and I watch that the night before we record our next episode. So Andrew, what have you got?
Well, the first one pulled out this week, and let's see if you have seen it or not. It is 1991's Coen Brothers movie, Barton Fink.
Yes, I have. Long time ago, but yes, I have.
Okay, so that one's out. Let me rummage in, find another one. What have we got here? You have David Cronenberg's Stephen King adaptation of The Dead Zone from 1983.
That I haven't seen.
Well, there you go. That is your movie for before our next podcast. And you won't believe this, Jay, but our next podcast will feature former Warner Brothers senior VP Bill Daly, who's coming on for our 10-year anniversary of the Green Lantern movie.
Oh, nice. That'll be a fun one. Was Bill over there during that time with Green Lantern?
Yes, he was. Oh. He was he was the senior vice president at Warner Brothers at the time. He has the most amazing stories of movies from Warner Brothers from 1990 all the way to, I think it was 2013, 2014.
Oh wow, it's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, not for Bill. He Bill has been a case of, do we have to do this movie? I was like, yes, we do. because it's the only one being celebrating a 10-year anniversary that week.
Wait. So are you going to like go over Green Lantern?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh boy. That's. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Good luck, Steve. Good luck, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Oh, the problem is we've both watched it, and now we're going to have to watch it all again just to...
Well,
oh, God.
it's like I say, this film is perfectly balanced between people who genuinely hate it and people who haven't seen it.
You should just do a podcast where you watch it and you're just talking while you're watching it.
Well, you know
wait
what?
a minute, they all know each other? I didn't know. This is so weird how the bad guy and the romantic lead and Hal Jordan all know each other, and they all knew each other from school. How convenient, right? Like, it's like, wow.
Why is there no bad guy until the end of the fourth act?
Yes. Yeah.
You know what, Jay? We may have to pull you back just to do that kind of episode on something in the future.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
Just to torment you even further. So, yes.
No, it's fine. Well, I don't know if I want to talk about Green Lantern, but give me a good film and we can go over it.
We'll bring you back for Jonah Hex. There you go.
Jonah Hex. It's not bad. You know what? I'll do Jonah Hex, but don't bring me back for Catwoman. Like, I wouldn't do Catwoman.
No, we wouldn't do that to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Jay, thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to having you back again. Everyone, please go and check out Trese on Netflix. Choose your language, whichever suits you. If you prefer your subtitles, go for subtitles with the original dialogue. If not, go for the English. I believe you've got Lou Diamond Phillips doing one of the voices. Is that correct?
Yes, he is. Yeah, Lou's pretty damn good at it. So, we got Lou and quite a few other really notable actors. So it's good.
That is awesome. Well, go and check this out. Jay, all the best to you. All the best to everyone at Lexinotus. We look forward to having you back with new projects and finding out what's going on.
Yes, we do.
Cool. Thanks.
So with that in mind, Steve, better cue our exit music.
Okay. Right. Warm up the car.
Warm up the car. So it's goodbye from me, Andrew Roger Carson.
And it's also goodbye from him, Andrew Roger Carson.
And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Jibber jabber.